record of public service. He graduated with honors from Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. He is a proud Gator fan. Chris has also had the privilege of graduating with honors from the University of Florida's Levin College of Law. While there, Chris was elected president of the Student Bar Association and served as research assistant to former Florida Governor Buddy McKay. Chris previously served as speechwriter, press secretary, and campaign press secretary for Senator Bob Graham, and as a campaign manager for Florida's former statewide elected chief financial officer, Alex Sink. In 2008, Chris served as one of 27 Florida electors in the United States Electoral College, an area that many of you may have become more familiar with over the last few months.
Why?
As it was getting perhaps more attention. From 2011 to 2015, Chris was chief of staff for the consolidated city of Jacksonville, which is the 12th largest city by population in the United States, where he managed Mayor Alvin Brown's office team with oversight of policy, advocacy, communications, outreach, and scheduling. And now, shameless plug, with former Florida Governor and U.S. Senator Bob Graham, Chris, brought it, thank you. Chris co-authored a book about how Americans can flex their citizenship muscle to get government to respond, called America, the Owner's Manual. You Can Fight City Hall and Win. And even more shameless plug, I highly recommend this book to all of you. If you've ever considered or thought about whether it's an issue, it's a politician, it's a cause, something that you've cared about, not known how to take action to try and affect policy change, that book is a step-by-step instruction manual, plus a lot of inspirational stories in there as well on how folks have come about affecting change in government. So with that, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Chris and Stephanie, for coming. This is a panel on careers in the public sector. And as you just heard, both of our panelists today have had quite esteemed and very good careers thus far in the public sector, both of whom have had experience here as Gator alums. So to start, I thought it would be good, I'll just ask each of you to go ahead and share with the group how you ended up in your current careers, or what was your path in education that led you there, especially too, if you wouldn't mind including for us just sort of thoughts. You know, when you were in college, did you see yourself taking this path? And if not, where did you see yourself originally going, and then how did you end up where you currently are? So Stephanie, why don't you begin if you wouldn't mind?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I did not envision myself still being in Gainesville 20 years after I arrived, but I grew up in the Tampa area, and I would say from about middle school on, I wanted to, for whatever reason, become a lawyer, and so that was sort of always a long-term goal of mine. I came to the University of Florida, majored in political science, but at the insistence of my dad, who wanted me to have a job after undergraduate. I was also a business major, so I majored in finance as well. And I really have always enjoyed government, political science. I'm one of those people that, you know, can watch commission meetings on the TV and really enjoy it and get excited about it. So it's not a surprise that I ended up where I am. When I was here for undergrad, I really enjoyed all of the classes. I took varied classes. Going to the business school was good as well. I mean, I ended up taking a break and not going to law school right after undergrad. I went to Career Day because that's what you're encouraged to do as a business major, and ended up talking to Anderson Consulting, who has a big government sector group, and they convinced me to go be a consultant. So I did that for 2 years in Tallahassee. I worked at different agencies. I worked at the Department of Juvenile Justice first, and then I worked at Department of Business Professional Regulation. So I was in both of those agencies, and what we did as consultants was try to make government more efficient, more effective by using technology. But I realized that I didn't really want to know how any of those things worked. I just wanted the things to work So I was doing a lot of coding and things of that nature. So I sort of realigned myself and was very committed to going back to law school at that point. So I did. I went to law school here, and when I was in law school, I thought that I wanted to do children's advocacy, and I did a lot of work in that area, and discovered that it was really too traumatic for me. I worked for the Guardian Ad Litem program, and it's really devastating what a lot of these children go through, and it's a broken system. I mean, it really is. So I decided that that was not something I could spend my whole career on. So I was mentored by Barbara Bennett Woodhouse, who was a professor at the law school. She was the director of the Center for Children and Families, and she had clerked for Sandra Day O'Connor. And in one of our conversations, she really had encouraged me to clerk, and that's why I ended up clerking for a federal judge. So I had applied to many judges in the state of Florida, wanted to stay in Florida. Florida is where I was born and raised, and knew I wanted to be in Florida. And when you're a lawyer, it's really important. I think it's more difficult as a lawyer to go from state to state. I mean, just you have to be barred for one, so you have to pass. It takes a year to go through, the character process, the bar exam. So you're not very mobile. But not only that, when you start practicing, you get engaged in the community, in the local community, and so it's really hard for you to even move from city to city, or at least that's sort of my experience thus far. So at any rate, I decided to clerk for Judge Hodges, who was in the Middle District of Florida. He was appointed by Richard Nixon, 1971. He's been on the bench 45 years, still practicing, still a judge on the bench. And I had no idea at the time what a phenomenal judge he was. He actually received an award from the U.S. Supreme Court for being the best judge in the country. Justice Breyer gave it to him a few years before I clerked for him. But he's just known as somebody that is professional and civil, brilliant. And so I had the chance to work with him side by side for 2 years as what they call elbow law clerks. So we are attorneys, it's after law school, and we help assist the judges with their written orders. I would handle half of the docket, which means that I was, writing orders for the judge, ruling in favor of one party or another in all sorts of cases. I mean, contract disputes, employment discrimination cases. We had a case under the Hague Convention involving a child abduction. I also worked with the judge on sentencing and the guidelines and figuring out what the sentences would be for some of the criminal cases we had. So we had mostly drug cases and child pornography, so at the time. But being in that position with the judge for 2 years allowed me to see all types of law and all types of lawyers and practice areas. And what I really enjoyed was employment discrimination. And there was a lawyer in particular that really impressed me in the way that he tried cases and his legal memorandum that he submitted to the court. And the judge had spoken very highly of him, had a number of trials with him over the years. So I emailed him, Tom Gonzalez in Tampa, and he essentially hired me on the spot without a resume or just because he held the judge in such high regard. So I ended up going to work for Tom in Tampa, and the rest, well, we moved to Tampa, and Miss Gainesville, I was married at the time. My husband had been here, a teacher, civics teacher actually, and then an administrator. And so, we were having a little bit of trouble adjusting to Tampa, and didn't realize how much we had, grown to love Gainesville. And so we were actually at an event for the judge celebrating his 35 years on the bench. And one of his former law clerks, so every federal judge gets 2 law clerks, and they change every 2 years. So Judge Hodges has had over 40 law clerks, and so all the law clerks get together every year for a reunion and visit with the judge. And so he has law clerks spanning from their their 20s, I guess at this point, all the way till retirement age. And so we all get together every year, and we're a big family, essentially. And so one of the law clerks was telling me that the city of Gainesville City Attorney's Office City Attorney Marion Radson was looking for somebody who was a law clerk, who could do federal practice, constitutional issues, and my husband was standing next to me, and he said, "Stephanie would like to do that." It's in Gainesville. So I said, "I guess I'd like to do that." And he called Marion, and they actually had to repost the job. The job had been closed already, so he did that, and I applied, and I've been there ever since. I've been there 10 years. And I basically practice employment law for the city, but also constitutional law. So, it's a really fantastic job. I mean, it's, I think, where the action happens. I mean, in terms of policy and affecting the community. So the city is in charge of, the police, transit, the utility, public works, the roads, the parks. So you sort of see it all. My role primarily with the city to begin with, the city of Gainesville, because we're a college town, I think that has something to do with it. The city elected officials tend to be progressive and sort of come up with really interesting solutions to problems, things that have never been tested before or developed before. And so we've had some of those ordinances where have been tested in court for the first time, and so I've had the chance to defend some of those cases all the way up to the First District Court of Appeal, but be involved in writing the ordinances and then also defending them up through the courts. So that's been a really neat experience. So an example of that would be our panhandling ordinance. We had problems with people being in the streets collecting money at traffic, and so I had a hand in developing that ordinance and then defending it in court. Landlord-tenant ordinance, some of you might be familiar with, where your landlords, the idea was to get the landlords to manage their properties better so that College Park didn't look like a slum. So that was tested. I went up to the First District Court of Appeal, and that was my case, and we prevailed in that case. So it's been a really neat experience working for the city. So that's been my path.
Great, thank you. Chris, do you mind sharing?
Well, I'd love to, and I just love one thing that Stephanie said, which is the sort of focus on local government. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But one thing I would encourage all of you to think very seriously about is to take your focus off of Washington. That might be a good idea for a lot of reasons. Take your focus off of Washington and focus more on the state and local level. And I'll now kind of walk through why I feel that way. There were really two people who inspired me to go into public service, and those are Bob Graham, who I still have the privilege of working with today, and Lawton Giles. I grew up with Bob Graham as governor, so he was sort of my political and governmental role model as I was growing up. And then when I was a senior in high school in 1990, I had the privilege to work on Lawton Giles' campaign for governor that year. And the two of them were really people of enormous integrity, great interest in good government, outstanding leaders who were two of the best governors and best United States senators, because both of them were in those roles, that Florida has ever had. So largely on those experiences, I decided that I wanted to study public policy in college. As Kevin indicated, that was my major at Princeton, where I went to undergrad. And then I decided that while I thought I eventually wanted to go to law school, I did much like what Stephanie did, which is I wanted to take some time off and get some perspective before I went back to law school. So I spent 5 years working. I graduated from college in May of 1995, and after the necessary trip that I took, I think, to Europe with a couple of friends of mine, came back and immediately moved to Washington without a job, without an apartment, and began pounding the pavement on Capitol Hill because I knew I wanted to work in Congress. So I first got a job since I went to college in New Jersey, I first got a job with Bill Bradley, former NBA star turned United States Senator, and worked for him for a brief period of time. And then I got sort of the luckiest break of my life. I was working in Senator Bradley's press office and happened to check the printer one day, and someone had printed out a job announcement for Senator Graham's new speechwriter. So I immediately picked that up the printer before anyone else could grab it. And I walked down to Senator Graham's office, and I had sort of known their office manager because I had very irritatingly been dropping off my resume there about once a week. And I immediately went to the office manager and said, I'd like to apply for this job. And so after going through the testing, Senator Graham asked me to be his new speechwriter. And so over a period of about 5 years, served as his speechwriter, his campaign press secretary when he was reelected in 1998, and then his Senate office press secretary. So did that for, was on Capitol Hill for almost 5 years. And then particularly having had the experience back in Florida, I lived in Tallahassee when he ran for re-election, I realized this was home, this is where I wanted to be. So I made the very wise choice to matriculate at the University of Florida Levin College of Law, and had a terrific 3-year experience. I think one thing that I really enjoyed about being at the law school here at the University of Florida was not only the fact that 6 or 7 Saturdays a year I could enjoy myself in the center of the universe, the swamp, but also the fact that I really felt I was with a collection of Floridians who really, both on the faculty level, the administrative level, and the student level, a collection of Floridians who cared about the future of the state and had a lot of sort of similar interests in that regard. So I spent 3 years in law school, then I went into private practice for a couple of years after that. And by the way, while I was in law school, and this is something any of you who go to law school in the state of Florida, I highly recommend if you get a chance. They have a program where you can serve as a certified legal intern in the state attorney's office, public defender's office during your last semester in law school. And it means you can actually try cases under the supervision of a licensed attorney. So I spent my last semester in law school as a certified legal intern here in Gainesville at the 8th Circuit State Attorney's Office, where I actually got to try a couple of cases, act like a real lawyer. It was a terrific hands-on experience. So then I went into private practice for a couple of years and decided that I wanted to kind of get back into politics and government. So I took a year off from the practice of law, and I became campaign manager for Alex Sink, who in 2006 was elected Chief Financial Officer of Florida. Returned to the practice of law. I'm from Jacksonville, so that's where I've lived throughout my career. Returned to the, by the way, anyone here from Jacksonville? Oh, good man. Where are you from? Where'd you go to high school?
Oh, I'm actually from Middleburg, but
Oh, well, that's good. Did you go to Middleburg High School?
no, I actually went to a private school off of Old St. Augustine Road up
Okay.
in Mandarin.
Okay, great. All right. Good to see you. Always nice to see another Northeast Floridian in the house. But went back into private practice for several years, but continued to stay active in sort of the political world. And then in 2011, got back into government full time. And it was really an amazing experience because it just sort of reawakened my passion for the governing side. I will endorse everything Stephanie said about working in local government. It is where it's at in democracy right now. Local governments, city and county governments are the laboratories of reform, of innovation. As Stephanie said, they are the levels of government that are closest to the people. If you're working in local government, you come home every day with the enormous gratification of feeling like you've actually been able to improve your community that day. I think one thing that's tougher about working in Washington, to a lesser extent Tallahassee, although Tallahassee is a little closer to local governments in this sense, is that it's harder to see and feel the immediate effects of your public service. If you're working in Gainesville City Hall or the Alachua County Commission or the Alachua County School Board or any similar entity in the other 66 counties in Florida, you do feel and see the immediate impact of that work. And I'll tell you what I also really like about it is, and this sort of relates to the subject of the book that Senator Graham and I just wrote, local government is the place where citizens can have the biggest role in shaping policy, voicing their needs, and I'll brag a little bit on the city of Gainesville and Alachua County, both have been extremely forward-thinking about finding ways to get citizens involved. So that's another great way to do that. So I'll tell you, I mean, it was difficult in college as I watched friends take a variety of consulting jobs or investment banking jobs, and even other points in my life where you saw people kind of going down those tracks. But I don't think there's anything, certainly maybe not financially, but I don't think there's anything that offers kind of the intellectual compensation and the public service compensation of working in or around the government space, whether that's in a government job itself, whether that's in politics, whether that's on the campaign side. I've spent a lot of my life on the campaign side in addition to being on the governing side. It is one of the most rewarding things you can do, and to actually feel like you're really making a difference in this world, both by giving citizens the opportunity to get engaged in the political process, but but also in having the ability to shape the community you live in day out. So I have to say, I'm really heartened it's interesting, when we wrote our book, there was some statistics we quoted in it, and I'll tell you one today. At the end of 2015, the Pew Charitable Trust, highly reputable research nonprofit based out of Washington, did a survey of a large number of Americans. 74% of those surveyed said, we don't think government listens to people like us anymore. There's a lot of cynicism out there about government, and we certainly saw that reflected, no matter what side you were on, we certainly saw that reflected in the 2016 election with the tone of the campaign. A lot of cynicism about government out there. I have to tell you how heartened I am to see a room filled with young folks who are interested in going into public service and doing something in the public space. That makes me feel a lot better about the future of the United States than I felt at times during the campaign, when all we ever heard was about how people who were in public service, just a lot of negativity on the subject. So to see you here makes me feel actually much more optimistic about the future. So thank you for your interest, and I'm happy to answer any other questions today, but just thanks for your interest in being in the public policy space.
Great, well, thank you both very much. So as you heard, I find it's really interesting in my own past experience in somewhat similar ways. You never quite know, as we just heard, where you're going and opportunities that arise in places that you may not have thought about before. So, I encourage all of you going forward, keep your eyes open for those opportunities that pop up, or that friend that says, hey, have you ever thought about this? Because it can really help open things up. I will also let you know we're going to open it up for questions in just a moment, but I'm going to go ahead and ask our guests another question, and then we'll take some from the audience. But just in your current careers, for both of you, and you've been, as we just heard, you've worked at the federal level within federal government or for federal judgeships. You've both worked in the private sector, and now you work more locally in the public sector at the local level. What would you say in your current positions have been your biggest challenges, as well as what would you say has been your biggest success? And I'll let either of you answer that, whoever would like to go first.
Okay, biggest challenges. So I think, and sort of follow up with what Chris was saying about, citizens believing that they don't have an impact. That's certainly not true at City Hall. I've seen it time and time again. When people show up to the commission meetings and talk, when you email your elected officials, I hear about it. If it's something that I'm involved in, the commissioners forward the emails to me, and they want to know what this is about. So you do have that impact and that effect, and so that's pretty incredible. You can be involved, but in terms of the challenges, I would say the challenges are, for me as a lawyer for the city. I often say that some of my strongest advocacy does not happen in court. It happens with my own client. And for me, it's really challenging. The elected officials get to make the decisions, or the managers get to make the decisions. I am not the decision maker. I give advice. And so sometimes for me, it's very frustrating when I see, what's happening after being there for 10 years, and the elected officials, they have 3-year terms. And so we have sort of a longer view as staff for the city. And so sometimes it can get sort of frustrating and disheartening when you want to see something move in this direction. You think that's what's in the best interest of the city and the people, and you have individuals involved that don't have the history, don't have the knowledge, don't have the time, and so we spend a lot of time just trying to advocate, trying to give that history. A lot of times I'm pulling out old memos, old files. I'm like, look, we've been down that road, doesn't work, we're gonna get in litigation, let's try to move in this direction. And so you're always trying to steer the ship in the right direction. So that's really a big challenge. Another challenge for me is I spend about 1/3 of my time with the police department and police misconduct. So, employment law we have 2,500 employees for the city, from bus drivers, police officers. When they engage in misconduct at work, the city may terminate their employment or take other disciplinary action, and those employees get to challenge that under their labor agreements. And so my job is to defend those decisions that the city's made. So, for instance, last week, 2 weeks ago, we had a case involving the termination of a police officer. And those cases are really difficult for me because I really feel like, after looking at everything and investigating it, that this officer should not be an officer. I think that if this officer is reinstated, that it would be a harm to the public. And so I take that very seriously and, probably take it to heart. And so for me, sometimes, we don't win all the cases. You have an arbitrator who gets to decide, and an impartial decision maker. And, so sometimes I've lost cases where somebody gets put back to work, and I really feel like it was the wrong thing to do. But, we're part of the process, and you have to abide by that decision. But sometimes that's extremely difficult and challenging to overcome. Biggest successes at work, I feel like, just generally speaking, I work in an office. I have nine of us are in the office, 9 attorneys, and everybody I work with has integrity. They work hard. We're not the bureaucrats that a lot of people think we are. We all work really hard, and we all really care about what we're doing. And I would say that's true with our clients, who are department heads, the director of public works, or the chief of police. We are all moving in the same direction and all want to do good for the city and the state and beyond. So it's been really amazing to work with such great people, and I don't know that I would do anything else. You have an impact on the community, a direct impact, and I'm not sure the community knows what we do or what's going on behind the scenes, but you feel good about what you do every day, and you feel like it's the right thing. And he mentioned about the investment bankers, and I have friends that are in private practice or investment banking too, and doing all sorts of things, and they were pretty miserable. And so I make a pretty good living. My husband works for the university. He makes a pretty good living. We have 2 kids. We have a nice house 4 blocks from the stadium, which is, as Chris said, the center of the universe. So we have a pretty good life. We went to a concert this weekend, in St. Louis. So, we have fun. You don't really need gobs of money. You need enough money, to pay your bills and raise your family and go on vacations and that sort of thing. And you can do that, I think, in local government and be happy. A lot of my friends, I've been on statewide committees for the Florida Bar. They're in private practice, and the number one question I always get when I go to the Florida Bar meeting every year is, because a lot of people graduated from Florida, and they all want to know, how can they get back to Gainesville? This was the best time of their life. They want to be here, and we're here. I'm here, and living a really good life. So it's definitely an awesome career path in my view. So.
Yeah, Stephanie has kind of got what I consider the golden ticket, because she did find a way back to Gainesville. For all of you who are thinking, man, I'm about to graduate, I can't wait to go somewhere else, I promise that at some point in the future you're going to think, man, I really loved it in Gainesville. I don't know a single member of my law school class who doesn't think very fondly about the time they were here. Now the problem for us lawyers, and Stephanie, who's obviously so well qualified and has a particular niche, the problem for lawyers is Gainesville's a bit of an oversubscribed legal market, unless you have the kind of niche that Stephanie has, and so it can be harder to get back in this market. But I will sort of speak to my experience, and I've been out of public service. I've been a full-time author for the last year and a half, as Senator Graham and I have written this book together. But I'll speak to the most recent public service experience when I was the chief of staff at the city of Jacksonville. The challenges, I would say, are threefold. One, you never have enough money to do what you'd like to do, particularly in local government. And that's changing a little bit as the economy improves. But state government, through things like Save Our Homes and some other sort of actions they've taken over time, have made it harder for local governments to raise revenue. And you particularly feel that in economic downturns. Our administration, we really came into office at the worst possible time fiscally. We were the only administration in the last 50 years that saw the total revenues decrease over the 4 years that we were in office. So very difficult budget times. And you know, the great thing about being in cities is you want to have some wherewithal to be able to invest in the community and kind of help move the community forward. When you're struggling to balance the budget each year because of limited revenue, that's can be hard to do. So I think that can be one frustration. A second one is things never move as fast as you want them to. This is true at every level of government, but also true at city government. Well, I think city and county governments can be more nimble and more efficient and move things faster than certainly things move, say, in Washington. It's hard to think of anything that wouldn't move faster than things in Washington, but you can move faster. You can never move as fast as you'd like to. And so that can occasionally be a frustration, but it's part of the process. And the third one is, look, there's going to be some, these jobs are political jobs. I mean, these jobs being the elected officials and to some extent staff, these are political jobs. So you have to know that some politics is going to enter into this. Not every decision is always going to be made strictly on the merits of that decision, as nice as that would be. There's always some politics that seeps into the process, and that's just the nature of living in a democracy where voters make political decisions that lead to people holding office who then want to get reelected at some point. So just know that a little bit of politics, maybe a lot of politics at times, seeps into the process, although I think that's less true at the city and county level than it is at the state level and certainly at the federal level. I would say the really wonderful thing about working, and Stephanie covered a lot of this, but the really wonderful thing about working in local government is you can see, you can do big things, and you can see the tangible effects of your work. And I'll give you a couple of examples from Jacksonville from our 4 years. Starting with the big things. Jacksonville, like most other cities, and I don't know, Gainesville's actually probably not in the same boat because they've been sort of on top of their pension issues for years, but a lot of cities around Florida and the country have really struggled with the costs of employee pensions. When we came into office, Jacksonville had a pension fund that was about 40% funded. That was one of the lowest in the state. We had an unfunded pension liability of $1.7 billion. To put that in perspective, the city of Jacksonville's annual budget is right around $1.1 billion. So the unfunded liability was almost double what the city's annual budget was. So the mandate of our 4 years was, and you know, this is partially, I think, why we weren't able to do kind of some more interesting things, because we had to put so much attention to this, was to solve this pension problem. 11 days before my boss left office, the end of his term, we enacted a comprehensive pension reform plan for police officers and firefighters who represented the bulk of the pension system that is projected to save about $1.6 or $1.7 billion over the next 30 years. Very comprehensive community-wide reform. A lot of different stakeholders came in, but we were able to do that before we left office. Where you see the immediate impact is, again, Jacksonville, like a lot of other cities around the state and around the country, has been focused on revitalizing its downtown and its urban core. And those of you who are in Gainesville have seen the incredible work that's gone on here to revitalize Gainesville's downtown. Well, similar situation in Jacksonville. When we took office in 2011, there was a blighted piece of property. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Jacksonville. Hopefully you're there at least one weekend a year, every year. But don't know how many of you are familiar with it. But one of our great attributes is our long riverfront that we have, particularly in downtown. Riverside Avenue is just to the west of downtown. Well, for years, there was a long blighted piece of property that nothing sat there. It's a neighborhood called Brooklyn. And so for years, it was like a wasteland. By the end of our 4 years, Brooklyn is now your ultimate work, live, play neighborhood. Much like some that are developing in Gainesville. You have mixed use housing, restaurants, grocery stores, there's a fresh market there. So that entire area where it was blighted and empty is now full of life. People are moving there, and has become sort of the cornerstone of the new Jacksonville downtown. I give you those two examples to say that I think in city and county governments, maybe more so right now than any other level, you can do big things that are important for a community long term, but you can also do things that give a community a shot in the arm in the short term and really help to improve quality of life. To me, that was the satisfaction of being in that job, to be able to sort of look back after that period of time and say, we really left a stamp here. we really left the community better than when we got here. That's very gratifying.
Thank you. Questions from the audience? Anybody have a question for our panelists? Yeah, please.
I was actually going to ask, as an author, what made you find test to, I guess, your motivation or your inspiration? What got you into the process of
Into writing?
Mm-hmm.
So without question, the luckiest break in my professional career was the chance to work with Bob Graham, which I did for 4.5 years in Washington, and we've maintained a good friendship and working relationship. So Senator Graham approached me, this is the second version of this book we've written. He approached me in, I want to say 2006, 2007, and said, you know, look, he had just retired from the Senate. He'd spent a semester at Harvard teaching at the Kennedy School and had really found that we had a real gap in terms of citizens understanding what it took to move government in their direction. So he said, would you be at all interested in working on a book together? Well, coincidentally, that's something I've been thinking a lot about: low voting rates, an increasing amount of cynicism among the electorate. And so we collaborated on our first book. And then as I was leaving City Hall in 2011, with the huge explosion in social media, a bunch of different new citizen engagement tools, we thought, and a level of cynicism about government that, as you heard the statistics I quoted, where 3/4 of Americans thought the government no longer listened to them anymore. We decided we want to do a new, improved, and dramatically remodeled version of our book. So we published that in October of last year. And it's interesting, we really found we got the inspiration. The book, I don't want to turn this into an advertisement at all, but just in a real nutshell, the book, Kevin already did a very fine job of that, but the book is it teaches citizens the skills they need, the 10 skills they need to be effective in making government work for them. And in addition to the advice we provide, we have what are called 35 tips from the pros in the book, where it's different civic experts, mayors, members of Congress, political consultants, pollsters, others, who provide advice on, almost punch list advice to citizens on how to implement some of those skills. And even more importantly, we tell stories throughout the book, stories of citizens who've used the skills of effective citizenship to move government in their direction. There's nothing more inspiring than sitting down with a citizen who has identified a problem that they need government's help to solve and have used the skills of effective citizenship to do that. And I'll just tell you very, very quickly about one of those, because it leads the entire book. Just over a year ago, I was sitting in a restaurant in Atlanta across the table from two women, one named Debbie Dooley, the other one named Colleen Kiernan. Debbie was one of the 13 founders of the National Tea Party. She was the founder of the Georgia Tea Party. Colleen, in sharp contrast, was the executive director of the Georgia chapter of the Sierra Club. So you think, here's two people who are about as different ideologically as you could find. Well, they had formed this very unlikely coalition because they cared deeply about Georgia becoming a more solar power friendly state. And through their work with some other solar power advocates, they were opposed by the biggest special interest in Georgia, Georgia Power, the state's large investor-owned utility, who had no interest in Georgia becoming a more solar-friendly state. But Debbie and Colleen and their coalition that they put together were successful in persuading the Georgia legislature, the Georgia Public Service Commission, and others to make Georgia more solar-friendly. They were so successful in this coalition that they also convinced Georgia Power. And Georgia Power has now been setting up solar generating facilities around the state of Georgia. They've been so successful that Georgia is one of the top solar energy producers in the country now, to the point where we in Florida, we may be the Sunshine State in name, but Georgia is really the Sunshine State in fact, in many ways. When you hear stories like that, and we have a number of them in the book, that provides all the inspiration you need to try to share those with other Americans who want to, the old adage is, well, you can't fight City Hall. That's the reason for our title. You can fight City Hall and win.
Yeah.
Hearing those stories is all the motivation you need to try and share that gospel with other Americans.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, especially with context, this past election, the stigma of the government, like you just mentioned, and would you recommend will you push to try and make it like a required reading for courses at universities?
I love the way you think. I think it should be required reading for every government class in the world. So it's interesting. We wrote it for sort of two audiences. One audience is just the public at large, anyone who wants to build and flex their citizenship muscles. And we've had a really interesting reaction since November, and I mean this on both sides, for people who say, what do we do now? Either we supported the winning side and we want to hold government accountable, or we did not support it and we want to figure out a way to kind of do more, get engaged more. And we hope the book provides a bit of a prescription for that. But we've also written it for an academic audience, like you talk about. It's very unfortunate, but about 40 years ago, the decision was made in this country to stop teaching civics in secondary schools. And what civics sort of has been taught over that time period tends to be what we call spectator civics. You learn, the three branches of government, key elements in history. It doesn't tend to be what is better, which is participatory civics. In other words, how do you get out there in the field? How do you engage in the arena of democracy and actually use your rights and responsibilities as citizens to move government in your direction? So part of our goal in writing this is not just to provide information to the public at large, but to really help change the way we think about teaching citizenship in this country to one where when you leave that experience at the college or university level or at the high school level, you're thinking about civics not just in terms of, well, what does the Supreme Court do versus what the Congress does? You're thinking about it in terms of, now I have all the skills I need to go hold government accountable to clean up my local lake, or to change those school boundaries I don't like, or to implement a variety of other solutions that I feel are important. So yeah, if you could help us make that happen, every government class in America, we would really appreciate that.
Well, and I'll say too, I mean, what's great about the book and thinking about civic activism as well is that as a student, it's teaching you ways to get involved, and then as we've heard, you have the other side of it. You have those who are working in local government that come together with citizens such as yourself. So you can do it both ways, where you can be more active and involved at this point, and then think about careers where you then go to work for a city or county where you actually are the one who are overseeing implementation of new policies or programs or things to clean stuff up.
Well, Kevin, if I could say one thing, and Kevin put in a very nice plug for my book, so I'll put in one for the Bob Graham Center for Public Service. One of the many incredible attributes about the Bob Graham Center, not how many of you are involved in it, but I encourage all of you to look for opportunities to do so, is one of their, and I think Kevin actually leads this initiative, one of their efforts is to look for ways to help place students in internships at various government levels, whether that's a in-house internship or what they call a virtual internship, so they can get that sort of hands-on experience. So, I mean, the kind of great work that obviously many of you are interested in is happening right here at the University of Florida at the Bob Graham Center.
Well, thank you. And shameless plug, I have more information on our internship programs available right here. And actually, let me ask both of you. Stephanie and I were chatting about this just before the panel. Did either of you have internships when you were going through school? And if so, what did you do?
So I was trying to think in undergrad, I actually had to work. I had to have a paid job through undergrad, so I had various paid jobs. But I was really involved in student organizations. I did Florida Alternative Breaks a couple of years, and I was involved in the Women's Leadership Conference. And so I had some leadership activities. But then in law school, I interned for a summer with Justice Periente at the Florida Supreme Court, and I think that was, it was an incredible experience, but it was critical to me getting my federal clerkship too. So I know, at the law school level, I'm more engaged with the law school and work with them more frequently. But the law school offers a number of organized internships and externships at all sorts of governmental agencies, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the City Attorney's Office, Public Defender, State Attorney. And so there's tons of opportunities for students to intern, and I think it's really critical to have those experiences, in undergrad or law school, because those experiences will get your foot in the door for the next step down the road. But our office, the City of Gainesville, the City Attorney's Office, we have interns every semester. One of our lawyers will take an intern. And it's through a formalized process through the law school where students submit applications and actually receive credit. I also somehow have a steady stream of law students through, I guess maybe through the Inn of Courts or other organizations I'm involved in who want to volunteer in my office or shadow, and so I often have students that I'll take to lunch or coffee, or that'll come in and watch a hearing or something of that nature. I've had volunteers, they don't come in for credit, they'll just freely do work for me, which I really appreciate because we have plenty to do. So usually what I ask my interns to do is I handle all the charges of discrimination to the city. So anytime an employee complains that they're being discriminated against and they have to file a charge with the Florida Commission on Human Relations or the EEOC, the federal agency, and the city has to provide information as to what we did and why we did it. So I ask the law students to draft those position statements and gather the documents, and we review that whole process, and so that's what our interns do for me, at least in my office. So it's a great experience, and I'm not sure, I think in City Hall we have internships as well. The mayor's office I know has had interns, the city manager's office has as well. There's all sorts of opportunities, and Chris was speaking about redevelopment. We have a redevelopment agency. So we have, they're professionals, they're project managers, architects. I don't know how many of you have been to Depot Park in Gainesville, okay?
Sure.
So it was a wasteland, a complete toxic wasteland. The city literally took all of the dirt out of there. It was contaminated, replaced it, and built this awesome park, bike paths. Just riding my bike. I was a student here 20 years ago and lived at one point on Depot, and it was not pretty. In fact, I did not want my parents to come because I thought they were going to come take me home because there were prostitutes that would walk by my window at my apartment, and I would run on those paths. For whatever reason, I didn't care as a student. It didn't really bother me, so I would run. It had a running path, and so now there's the DNA bridge, over 13th Street. It is night and day. It is so beautiful and amazing what this community has done with that. And that was a redevelopment project that agency was in charge of. And in fact, the redevelopment director, Anthony Lyons, is now our city manager. And I think in large part because of the change that he has been able to affect in our community and leading that kind of project. Another thing that the city has done is that was very involved in Innovation Square. So that 2nd Avenue, I think that runs from Tigert to downtown, that area looks completely different. And the city was involved in, there was a hospital there where Innovation Hub is, Alachua General Hospital. It came down, and now there's the innovation area and the hub, and hopefully an engine for private businesses in Gainesville. And so it's incredible. But all sorts of opportunities throughout the city to do different things. You don't have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be the chief of staff. There's all sorts of professional activities and departments that you could go to. I always tell students, if you have an interest in a particular area, just call up somebody in that department. I have students that come up to me at these types of events, and I'm happy to bring a student into the office, show them around, have them come to a city commission meeting, and I think many of us are the same way. So I think a lot of it is just on you all to put yourselves out there and establish networks. And I know it's kind of awkward at first, but a lot of us, I think Chris and I both like to talk and like to have we care about what we're doing, and we want you all to be involved too. So we're happy to use our time to bring you all into the mix.
Well, and I would also add, and first of all, if any of you haven't done an internship, I really encourage it. For me in law school, that was primarily, I think I mentioned I was a certified legal intern in the state attorney's office here. But there really are a lot of opportunities in Gainesville, and I really encourage you not to cause a deluge in Stephanie's office, but I really do encourage you to look for opportunities either with the city of Gainesville or with Alachua County or with the Alachua County School Board, any of the local or regional institutions. The St. Johns River Water Management District is not far away in Palatka. Look for those kinds of opportunities because it's a great experience. But here's another important reason to pay close attention to local government, not just in the future, but also while you're here. It has a dramatic impact on your life. When we wrote our first version of the book, the story that started that book was called Campaign Georgetown. It was about group of undergraduates at Georgetown University who they came back to school one fall after a summer away, and they found that the DC local government had dramatically changed the laws regarding parking in the area around Georgetown and regarding how many students could share a house together. So they came back and boom, the playing field was completely different. Well, they had two choices. They could just accept it, or they could get organized and do something about it. And they chose to get organized. And at that point in Washington, a lot of very neighborhood decisions were made by what were called ANCs, Advisory Neighborhood Councils, where their members were elected. Well, these Georgetown students decided, we're going to take over our ANC. So they ran an extremely smart campaign and elected 2 Georgetown students to the ANC, who then formed a coalition with a couple of friendly existing ANC members and reversed all of those parking and housing laws that they didn't like and made some other innovations. The other reason to pay close attention to local government while you're here and wherever you end up, whether it's here or elsewhere, is it has a dramatic impact on your life, either as student, especially including as students. So I would not just look for internship opportunities, I'd look for ways in which local government is impacting your life day in and day out. And not just local government, but state government. I'll give you one very quick example. Right now, if you want to early vote, the one place under Florida law where you cannot do so is a university campus. They are not allowed to have early voting sites on a university campus. Think of how many people that would benefit if you could have an early voting site on the campus of the University of Florida, maybe even right here at the Rights Union. So again, I think it's important as students. It's hard with everything you have going on and you're in class and you're concerned about academics and what you're going to do next. I get that. But also take a little time to think about how do local and state government affect your lives and what can you do about that even as students, because you can do something about it.
I think that's great. And for a shameless plug, the Bob Graham Center is working with the city of Gainesville on establishing an internship program, hopefully to be up and running next fall. For those of you that will still be around, if you have an interest, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about that later. We're pretty much about out of time, but we do have time if anybody's got any other questions that they would like to ask of the panelists. Yeah, please.
What do you think is the biggest problem in government right now? Because there is a lot of that anti-government sentiment, and at the very least, it has to be for a reason, if not maybe, et cetera, how it's followed. And how would you propose changing that biggest issue in government today?
Boy, that's a big question. You just wanted to name one?
My view is, we need good people. We need good people to run for office. We need people that are educated, that know the issues. I think that, we need people engaged. That's why the Bob Graham Center's here. That's why Chris wrote his book. We need everybody engaged, all hands on deck. People need to be involved, and they need to be educated about the process. They need to be educated about the courts, what the role of the courts. I think that's where we need to start.
Well, I would say, I think let's not treat the word government as monolithic, because I think that the problems don't exist as much at the local level and do exist a lot more at the federal and to some extent state level. And to me, the biggest problem is the sense of gridlock and people not being willing to work together across party lines to get things done. And that happens because they feel like citizens, are not going to hold them accountable for their failure to act or their failure to act like adults and work in a bipartisan fashion. Hence the need for citizens to get involved and to find ways to communicate using all the skills of effective citizenship to elected officials. And that's just not acceptable. And once citizens do that in a large way, I think you'll see a change in approach. Part of the reason local government has not turned in that direction is there's no level of government that is more accountable to the people. If someone's garbage doesn't get picked up on Tuesday, their city or county commissioner is going to hear about it an hour after the garbage truck doesn't show up. So providing that level of accountability at every level of government, I think helps to address that problem.
To follow up to that question, so how would you, obviously everyone here is interested in that, but how would you make one, government more accountable, and two, how would you make citizens actually want to be involved in government? Because as you said, most citizens aren't, and most citizens aren't doing those things, or good people running for office, and how would you change that?
Well, I can tell you what the city of Gainesville is doing. I mean, the city manager has a citizen-centered initiative, and so what he's trying to do is simplify citizens' experiences with government. I mean, for instance, to get a building permit, you basically have to be a lawyer to try to figure out, what you need to do to build a building, to open a business, and so really trying to simplify those processes and make them user-friendly, put them online, how to develop apps for people's phones, bringing services to the people. So really trying to be, government really hasn't thought that way. It's never been about, what's best for the citizens, what makes it easier for them. And so really looking at policy and regulation through a new lens is sort of where we are right now, and starting with looking at the planning department and building and being able to set up businesses so that businesses can come here and citizens can be, more easily interact with the government. So that's sort of what the city's doing at this point.
I promise I did not plant this question, but what I would say is you have to use the skills of effective citizenship. You define a problem, something that you want in your community to solve. You do your homework. You identify which level of government is going to help you solve your problem. You figure out how to persuade decision makers. You build the right coalition. You engage the media, and you find the way to fund your cause. And you're going to be, there's a very good chance you're going to be successful. In our book, we've got example after example of citizens who use those skills to move government in their direction. So I think the best way is figure out what the properly defined problem is and begin using the skills of citizenship to deal with it. I think once you've had a positive experience in holding government accountable or moving in your direction, it changes your perspective dramatically and you're much more likely to have more in the future. So that was a short way of saying there's something you can,
Okay, we had one more quick question from over here, and then we're going to wrap up. But if our guests are willing, I'm told that we can have a bit of chance to hang out and interact if you have other questions. So let's go over here for our last question.
Could you guys maybe talk about some of the benefits that going to law school could have on your career in public service outside of actually practicing law?
So you're not practicing?
Yeah, well, I actually am again, but
Okay.
in private practice.
Okay.
But I think a law school education is just a terrific foundation for a variety of careers in life, because let's face it, we live in a society where it's very law-based. And so having a knowledge of the law, I think kind of helps to inform your work, not just in practicing law, but also in public policy, because what you're doing there is obviously it has a strong legal foundation, but also in the business world as well, because every business has to deal with the legal world and kind of the complexity of the legal world. So I think that having the foundation of a law school education, whether or not you ultimately practice law in private practice, in the public sector, or not at all, is a terrific foundation for anything you want to do moving forward. In my class, there are certainly plenty of people who are practicing law still, but there are many others who have gone on to business and other things and say law school was still very, very valuable to me.
So I can give you a good example, just looking at Judge Hodges' law clerks and the varying things that they're doing. Rich McKay was one of his law clerks, and he's the general manager of the Falcons. So we were watching him on TV yesterday, and
Yeah.
I think I commented, I'm like, oh, Mr. McKay must have received a big bonus yesterday, but he,
If he didn't, some lawyer needs to renegotiate
yes,
his contract.
I'm
Yeah,
sure he
right.
looks very happy. So, but I mean, you can do virtually anything with a law degree, and it's helpful. I mean, he's in business essentially, but having that foundation is I think critical. I mean, and he clerked for a federal judge, and now he's managing football team. We have an author, Nathan Whitaker, clerked for the judge, and he wrote Tim Tebow's book and Tony Dungy's books. We have another law clerk who is a sports agent and basically negotiates deals, for athletes. I mean, there's all sorts of different things you do. We have a number of judges, federal, bankruptcy, state court judges. I mean, there's all sorts of different things you could do with a law degree. So I'm glad I went.
Well, good. With that, thank you all for coming. Let's help me thank our panelists. Thank you both.